Okay, so this is the Classic Games Done Quick panel, or also known as How Not to Do a Marathon in the Modern Age. But there's a lot of history behind it, and because it's such a long time ago in terms of internet years, because this is back in 2009, that I kind of have to set up the history for you, because back then, like, a lot of things were different than they are now. So, for example, back in 2009, streaming wasn't really commonplace among speedrunners, or really anyone. And Speed Demos Archive was the main hub of the speedrunning community. Remember that website? And then Speedruns Live, also known as SRL, was in its infancy. And there were only 3 races in 2009. And speedrun.com didn't even exist. The primary charity fundraising streams were the Speed Gamers, www.tsg.tv, and Desert Bus for Hope, desertbusforhope.org. Such fundraising streams were really not as common as they are now. They were quite rare. And ironically, the Speed Gamers were not actually speedrunners, and just a group of friends who just came together to raise money for charity. The fact that the Speed Gamers didn't speedrun actually really angered a lot of us. And as a result, we thought we could do better, or at least I did. So in the summer of 2009, a bunch of speedrunners on the Speed Demos Archive forum, we wanted to hold a speedrunning event of our own. And people just started posting a bunch of games in a forum thread. It was getting really out of hand, and people were offering tons of games without any real focus. So I was like, whoa, you know, let's focus on something. And so I chose classic games because that was SDA's strong suit at the time. You know, like Super Nintendo, NES, Genesis, 8 and 16-bit games mostly. And I actually suggested games for people to submit that, you know, I thought would be popular, which is something that would never fly in modern GDQ events.
People learned games for CGDQ. Yeah. So it's just like, hey, pick this game up. You can play it on the marathon stream. That would never happen today.
I actually, the Symphony of the Night I learned at the event and then did the rest the next day.
And he won.
Yeah, I don't think that would be able to happen now.
In addition to all this, the event was to be held at Magfest, which stands for Music and Gaming Festival. And we thought, we had a meetup there the previous year, and we thought that being a big convention would really help us out. And also they had really popular internet celebrities such as Brentalfloss. Do you remember that guy? He was very big back in 2009, 2010 era. So Magfest that year was taking place in the Hilton Mark Center, which held about 3,000-ish people. For those of you who know Magfest now, knows that takes place at the National Harbor Gaylord Hotel, which and they have 20,000 people at their event. So that's just kind of to put it in perspective how much Magfest has grown too. And I asked Magfest how to handle the internet. And they told me they were purchasing a bunch of WiMAX wireless modems, and if I paid them $100, then, you know, we could have one. And we chose Ustream as our streaming services because Twitch did not even exist back then.
Ustream was really the only option at the time.
Yeah, so the 2 main streaming services were Ustream and Justin. And just what happened with Justin TV, if a channel got over 1,000 viewers, they would start booting people from outside of the US because they didn't really have many servers outside of the US.
And Justin was basically like pirated sports streams.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, you probably saw the Super Bowl on it, maybe some Simpsons episodes. like when they made Twitch in 2011, Justin TV, they up-branded with video games. And OBS and XSplit did not exist either. There were really only 2 streaming programs, and really the main like broadcasting program was Wirecast, which cost $500, which was something that was way out of our budget back then. I know, hard to imagine. But so there was Flash Media Live Encoder, and basically it was very basic streaming software. You had a video, and you had an audio source, and that was it. And then you hit stream. You could also choose your bit rate.
Although that may have varied quite a bit anyway. Like,
True.
Like even if you chose a bit rate, it's like it might be like 500 some frames. It might be like 1,000 others. Who knows?
So eventually we settled on the name Classic Games Done Quick because it was a nod to the classic games we were playing and a nod to the old Quake Done Quick videos that SDA was known for in the past. And I set the donation goal at a lofty $5,000. And even back then, people were like, isn't that kind of high? And I was like, yeah, but I want to aim high. And one person even suggested a goal of $100.
$100.
They tried to backtrack on what they said. If the goal was met, then, you could increase. I was like,
No, coming in strong at 100.
Exactly. You got to commit. Anyway, the event was actually to start on New Year's Day, January 1st at 6 p.m. And we were going to go for about 48 hours. And I think we were supporting CARE, which was a foreign aid charity. And now I will show you the trailer to this event to show you how high tech everything was back in 2009. Okay, let's see.
Make it large.
Yeah, I can do this.
I love the little link cursor. Love it.
Minimize.
That stayed on screen for 15 more seconds? Wow.
Oh, yeah, totally. There was 3 more.
Oh, yeah.
You got the big old CARE logo. It pops in about 5 seconds later.
Oh, yeah.
Screaming orange. Screaming orange.
You don't want to do the screen transitions as fast as possible.
You gotta give people time to read. We are speed reading demos archive.
So now we have our stay at Magfest, or the short stay at Magfest.
Oh, goodness.
So we arrived at Magfest on New Year's evening, the day the event was supposed to start, to check in and to check ourselves in and collect the wireless modem. So after I check in, Magfest staff tells me that the wireless modems don't work because the provider was bought out. And the staff told me this information less than 24 hours the event was supposed to begin. I am told to find Magfest IT or a tech manager to help. Now, in the meantime, the staff told me that the wireless promo code was gold, and maybe we could make the hotel wireless work. So what also didn't help is that we didn't know where our station was until we saw it that it was parked in a little space in the wall in Magfest's main gaming room.
If you've ever been to a Magfest in the main gaming room, there's lots and lots of stuff going on. It's very, very dark, and it's very, very loud. And we were 10 feet away from a Rock Band setup, I think, or DDR or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you've been in the arcade around the corner over there, just multiply that by
room.
50.
Yeah, imagine an entire room of that with a very tall ceiling, so everything just echoes and booms.
Yeah, we'd be trying to do the stream basically where Skee Ball was in that arcade. It's basically how it was.
So I spend 2 or 3 hours desperately trying to find the IT person. And I meet one, and we exchange numbers so I can get an update on the situation if anything improves. And it turns out that the hotel wireless internet is quite terrible. I know, a shocker. And we can't manage to get anything out of it. I didn't want people to panic, so I withheld the information as late as possible. But in the end, it was pointless because there was a very obvious truth, and that was we could not stream. And I actually did manage to get in contact with the main IT manager, and he gave me this very helpful tidbit of advice. The hotel wireless code is gold. So that was the worst New Year's Eve I'd ever had. The mood was very grim, and what I received was very sage advice from the Contra speedrunning legend Frezzy Man. And what he said was drink a beer and go to bed. And that was exactly what I did.
Sage advice.
So the next day, we decided to test the stream and internet at my mother's house because she was only 10 minutes away from the Magfest location, and we had working internet there. And we had to test and see if our setup worked in the first place. So it turns out the setup and the stream worked just fine. Like, everything actually worked. So then...
Yeah, I mean, you had streamed from home before, so
yeah,
it's not like
exactly.
a shocker.
I tried texting the IT staff member who I exchanged phone numbers with yesterday, and after I texted him, his reply after about 5 minutes was a delightful, "Who is this?" So we arrive at Magfest around noon, which is about 6 hours before our event, and we have trouble getting in contact with IT and tech staff until 2 p.m. The staff assured me that everything was fine, we had plenty of time, but there was only 4 hours to prepare for the event. To put it in perspective, we prepare GDQs days in advance of the event, whereas we had less than 4 hours. So during all this chaos, we still had to present an SDA panel at 4 p.m. We had no time to prepare for the panel because of all the chaos I was trying to salvage, classic games done quick at Magfest. And I had zero desire to do the panel because I was laser focused on classic games done quick.
Yes, you wrote me into it when I wasn't even staff yet. So you're basically staff. Now get in there.
Wait,
Throwing you to the wall.
I thought we just had a bunch of people making things happen.
Well, there was SDA staff.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
true.
So the panel still went all right because we had videos prepared showing clips from various speedruns. So eventually, the CEO and lawyer at Magfest tell us why the internet at the Hilton Mark Center is terrible. It turns out that the hotel is locked into a contract with their cable provider, and they have to get their internet through the cable provider, and it turns out their internet is very, very bad DSL. To put it in perspective, the upload was no more than half a megabit, maybe 0.3 megabit. And yeah, this is for the entire hotel. And the hotel, it's probably roughly as big as this one, maybe a little bigger. So at one point, we do have a stream up and running, but it's a slideshow. For those of you familiar with the first Mega Man and Guts Man stage with the sliding platforms, instead of, smoothly scrolling like this, it's like,
You were getting like 30 frames a minute, maybe, something like that.
That's generous. So, to Magfest credit, there was a staff member named Thresh who did everything he could to help the stream, including tether from his phone. But in the end, the internet issues at Magfest were too great for us to overcome. And already past the original starting time, 6 p.m., we decided to head to my mom's basement to set up there.
Tearing everything down, loading it into the back of like 4 different people's cars, carting it across town, then carting like 20 other people across town.
Yeah. The carpool was quite chaotic. Anyway.
And after that event, we made a travel coordinator position because we felt that was necessary.
And so here is how chaotic and confusing it was at Magfest.
So we hadn't started yet, or no? We are pretty much at the mercy of Magfest staff. Did you have a good time? Good time here at Magfest? Around the blast. Woo! Enthusiasm. Andrew wasn't streaming. We didn't have a connection. We still don't. We are waiting for Magfest to provide us with. What? To provide us. Are we still waiting on it? That was like an hour ago. So it didn't start yet? Well, that's what I thought too. Well, we have to start with...
That video featured like a third of the attendees, by the way.
Yep.
Yeah, there were only about 20 people attending and 10 people actually playing.
Most people there had runs. Most people who attended had.
That's true.
There was like 2 who
And if they didn't at the start, they did by the end.
True. So this is when we finally get back to the house. So I had to call my mom to inform her that we were broadcasting from her house. And this is kind of how it went. Mom, I'm having a bunch of people come in the house. She's like, oh, it's okay. I'm at a bed and breakfast. As long as you pay for half of it, I'll let you use the house. I was like, okay.
Best contract ever.
Yeah. Cheapest venue fee I've ever heard of.
Yeah, true. So it goes without saying, moving all of the equipment and people to my mom's house was a huge inconvenience. It took us hours to set up, and we were already behind schedule. Even after we set up the equipment, the few people with cars had to drive roughly 20 people to and from the house and to the hotel. At least the internet worked reliably.
And this was like peak DC traffic as well happening around then.
Yeah, we had to leave around
It's like
6 p.m.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was rush hour. And the switch to my mother's house was very sudden and unexpected, and no one really knew of any restaurants in the area aside from me. And when you have a group of gamers who don't know what restaurants are around, there's one thing they will always agree to have, and that is pizza. And in this case, Domino's. Basically, by the end of the marathon, they were basically our sponsor. There were at least like 40 or 50 Domino's pizzas boxes just stacked on top of each other by the trash can. You would not have wanted to smell it at all. It was bad. And our other quote-unquote sponsor was Mountain Dew. I remember buying a 24-pack, and the contents disappeared in less than an hour, even though there were only 20 people at CGDQ, just to put that in perspective.
Yeah, I know he and I ended up walking to a local convenience store and like bring it back uphill for like a mile back to his house with like 3 on each shoulder, not 3 on each shoulder, but like 2 on our shoulders.
Yeah, a lot of soda was consumed that weekend. A lot of soda.
Yeah. In fact, I think someone made the old SDA logo using those Mountain Dew cans. So at this point, I was unbelievably stressed and strung out. Everything changing and falling apart just was super chaotic and just incredibly overwhelming, and success was looking more and more unlikely. I had never been so stressed in my life before CGDQ, and I've never been so stressed afterward either. So here's a video of how the mood was when we were setting up. I might try to point out some people, since you might not be familiar with some, because some of them aren't in the community anymore during the video. But it's a good video of how grim the mood is.
Yeah, I had it on for 5 minutes, off for 5 minutes, that sort of thing.
All right, so Mike, you've been here the entire time. Paint a scenario for me right now. What's going on?
That's Mike getting behind the Sonic Runner.
Very much in trouble.
And why are we in trouble?
We're 3 hours late.
So we're running 3 hours late.
We're 3 hours late. We don't have a setup. Well, we do now.
I prefer we had a plan.
Kind of just got the mares in, and I think Andrew's going to start within the next couple of minutes. So we're finally getting on track, but we're getting there very slowly.
Very slowly.
Awesome accent, by the way.
Oh, hi.
Meanwhile,
Cool. Meanwhile, we're
He still does.
M2K2.
That's our carrying the guy who made our website in the laptop over there.
Explain to me what you're doing. You're setting up to
working on the marathon pages right now.
Did you say you were changing the schedule?
Yeah.
Or are we just pushing everything up 3 hours?
I don't know yet. I gotta write on my. I'm just open everything up and making sure
If we're honest, alright, we could just
This is our chance to snoop around.
lop off the credits of each game. Knowledge is make up in 3 hours by the end of it.
Well, yeah. That would. Yeah, some RPG's like 20 minutes. Oh, sure, it is.
Oh, we were going to cut that off anyway. If it was that long.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how you 3 at 12.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't.
All the DKC games are too long on the credits.
Yeah.
It's ready. Even Resume got picked up. Got kicked off, man.
So it's a
Did he have to be
one person.
And that's the legend of Fresi, man.
Whatever.
What?
Like one person, only the person doing the speedrun in the basement's allowed in the basement?
Yeah,
Well, when the marathon starts rolling, then we probably... Yeah, people can move in and out. And
Okay.
Totally
But
happy.
it's just they need to get everything hooked up. I mean, 7 people can't be... We can't be 10 people down there.
Definitely did not happen.
Nope, never more than 10.
Never.
Too bad we don't have the running home because we have way more room than this. We can store everybody in there. So we just don't have the connection for it.
Hotel screwed over us. Screwed us over.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize enough here how he depended on the Magfest convention to give him a dedicated connection. Like, are we in Happy Perfectville where...
Like, if you want something done right, do it yourself. Don't depend on
Exactly. Well, let's go ahead and spawn a rainbow with some unicorns that are going to just like...
I have my goal too already.
Oh yeah,
He actually did pay for it, so... Like, it wasn't like he was just taking them at their word. He gave them money.
That's it right there. I skipped the part where you jumped in.
Oh. Oh yeah. That should I show that?
Keep it going. It's coming. I think it's soon.
It is soon, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Dive back in.
All right, we'll dive back in. Very professional panel.
For
here.
a second.
I forgot about that part. I think it's right.
I'm glad Trihex documented so much of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They expect you to know you're at the house. That's right.
That static HTML.
Oh yeah.
SDA was all about static HTML back in the day. I'll tell you that right
When
now.
do I come in?
Really soon, I'm pretty sure.
Well, if I don't come in soon, I'm gonna stop this video.
We have the fast forward powers.
There's one just behind you, I think.
Oh, someone tell us the.
Oh yeah.
Would you rather that? Well, that one doesn't have the ground.
Oh, we totally need to see that part. Under table action.
When do I come in?
There he is.
Oh. There, I'm like right around
At the
here.
stream, we have a good connection,
Awesome.
but we don't want too many people watching
Yeah.
the stream from here at once.
We
So at the most,
Here, I'm not watching.
I reckon at the most one other connection should. I reckon at the most one other connection should be active.
only. I don't mind if there's one connection active.
Think so.
But there should be no more than one. It can be Arcarian's, it can be mine, but just decide which one.
We're gonna make that clear too.
Maybe I'm lying.
Oh,
You lied to me.
Ah, well.
Okay. Anyway, as you can see, the mood was very grim and pessimistic, and the comment that Frezzy Man, the Suite of Speed, made about no chance of there 10 people being able to fit in the basement was completely untrue. There were probably at least 5 people in the basement at all time, and there were definitely plenty of moments when there were over 10 people crammed into the basement.
Everybody who was at the marathon was in the
yeah.
Yeah,
At some
exactly.
point it happened. Like there are people in the doorway as well,
And set up
sleeping in the corner and like all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Sleeping on the couch on camera.
That's true. Shouts to Mike89 and Trihex. Setup took so long that we started out about 3 hours late at 9 p.m. Even before we started, we were late, and it only got worse. One thing that a lot of people didn't know about back in the day is that we had a separate gameplay and commentary stream. And while you might think this is nice for, being able to, separate them both, but syncing them both at the same time was actually a nightmare, which is why we do it all in one stream now. There was one convenience about this, though. So because we had separate gameplay and commentary streams, we could set up the game stream first and then set up the commentary stream later. So what we did is that we set up the Mega Man games first, and then we didn't actually get the commentary up and running until like the very end of Mega Man 3.
So for context then, just to recap everything, we start the marathon with just game and nothing else, 3 hours after start time, and then commentary 3 hours after that. So it took 6 hours after start time to get any commentary at all.
Okay, Mega Man games weren't that long.
I'm pretty sure right out the gate we thought everything was working just fine.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I remember you and me sitting there with headsets on. Those headsets didn't work. They didn't.
No.
We got these headsets on. We're looking like, and just like, we said words for the stream that no one ever heard. And
In fact, about that, so we thought those headsets were working, but after an hour or two, after the chat telling us, it turns out that everything was being picked up on the webcam microphone, which was like a Logitech, webcam Pro 9000, because that was the new thing back in the day. It could do HD at like 5 frames per second. Anyway, so so the problem with this is that if you ever use a webcam microphone, they over peak and scratch very easily. So like if anyone sings or laughs, it'd be like ha ha ha. And so nowadays we're used to centering the camera on the runner and their couch. But back then, we figured that the commentator or host would be doing more of the talking, so we focused the camera on them, because that's what Desert Bus for Hope did. And people normally expect the runner to commentate during gameplay now, but because streaming wasn't as commonplace back in the days of CGDQ, people were a lot more quiet, and they weren't as used to commentating during their runs. And so, like, it wasn't until about a couple of hours in we actually started to focus the camera on the runner. And then that just ended up working out a lot better for our event. And so the webcam microphone actually picked up a lot of sounds from the outside, and even sounds from outside of the room, including people shouting their pizza and grocery runs, and the classic, "Hey Mike, emergency, your bathroom is swarming with ants."
Shout out to Josh the Funk Doc.
Yeah, don't worry, that problem was solved. So it's worth noting that the marathon basement was not very big, and the ceiling was low enough that I would hit the very tip of the ceiling, because it also had a bit that was a bit lower than the ceiling itself.
That beam was lethal.
Yeah.
It was, and
I barely got under it, and I'm like 5'4".
Yeah, and as carcinogen because he hit it multiple times.
Yep.
So one thing I decided to do for the marathon is I decided to place the Secret of Mana run during the graveyard shift, so that I and 2 other runners could cover the shift and take the hit for the rest of the runners. It turns out that was an incredibly bad mistake, because I was already very exhausted from waking up early, trying to make CGDQ happen at Magfest, and then lots of stressful last-minute preparation in my mother's basement. And then I was very tired going into the run, which I think started at like 4 or 5 a.m. at that point. And the run was 5 hours back then. And I was on the verge of passing out an hour into the run. So the speed gamers had this gimmick where they would consume like gross or extreme food or drink for donations. And I specifically told Runner they shouldn't engage in such behavior because it kind of takes away from the speed runs.
Mike doesn't take his own advice.
Yeah, so of course, at 5 or 6 a.m., I have solid judgment and decide a hot sauce incentive is a great way to wake myself up.
I mean, you had like 700 bottles upstairs. So why not, right?
That is kind of
So I didn't want to wimp out and drink Tabasco. So I decided to drink some Blair's After Death sauce, which is at least 50,000 Scoville units, which is a lot hotter than a jalapeno for reference. So drinking the hot sauce woke me up, but also searing with pain, and all my pain receptors were on fire, and I was basically unable to play. Eventually, I passed out anyway. Fortunately, Secret of Mana has this feature where you can drop in and out at any time, so the other 2 people, Reign of Soten and Molotov, were able to take over. And I only slept 1 or 2 hours when I passed out, but after I woke up, I calmed down a lot because I realized something. Nothing had exploded, the world was still turning, the marathon was still going on, and everything was okay. And I was still stressed, but I was a lot less stressed than I was when the marathon first started. I was pretty much a mess, honestly. And after Secret of Mana, I swore not to take another graveyard shift, but then awful games happened. In fact, as the marathon went along, we were kind of getting more comfortable, with being on camera, and we were gelling together, and we were all getting a groove, and we were having the fun.
Can't say that word.
Fun.
It's off limits.
Okay.
Say that word.
Okay, sorry if you don't see me after this panel, you'll know why. I've been banned for fun.
Gonna
Oh,
need
sorry,
your
the F word, the F word. So there were very few donation incentives during Classic Games Done Quick. Outside of character names for our role-playing games, donation incentives were few and far between. However, during Sonic 2, a fellow Sonic runner named Stansky threw in some challenges for Mike 89 to do during his Sonic run, including collecting all rings in Sky Chase Zone, and he donated when Mike was successful. And in the middle of the marathon, I actually talked to Phil and Baltus of the Speed Gamers who visited our event. And they told me that if I talked to them before the event, they would have tried to talk me down from a $5,000 donation goal. But it looked like we were going to hit the goal at the time. And we did end up hitting the goal about 36 hours into the event during Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, with at least 9 or 10 hours to go. And the birth of serious time was actually during Classic Games Done Quick. In fact, I'm the inventor.
Again, Mike not taking his own advice.
Yeah. So after Frezzy Man's Contra and Super C performances, which were both really stellar, I was getting kind of nervous and stressed.
Dude was a wreck.
Yeah, and I was got like comically serious. I was like, serious time. I'm gonna be very serious. Don't say anything during this run.
Yeah, and the commentary stream ended up being like his face next to the camera, like.
Probably. And like I was so incredibly serious that when I actually watched the VOD like 6 months later, I was like, I was actually almost laughing at how serious I was. And Rom Scout confessed to me after CGDQ that he actually left the room because he said he
I was cracking up way too much. When he went there, like. I was like, oh my God, I have to leave. I'm gonna die. So I went upstairs and was just cracking up. I mean, you could watch the stream. So
yeah.
I think all of us upstairs were cracking up.
To this day. Anyway.
And then you restarted the game like 3 times.
Yeah, you reset like 3 times.
I, only twice. Okay. Anyway.
They had that perfect stage 1.
Exactly.
With the quick kill.
So we peaked at 1,500 viewers during Gunstar Heroes. But there was a problem. Ustream started crapping out at this point, and it started booting people from the stream. Now, some people were very generous and started restreaming on live stream who are still on the stream, but the problem was that unless if you had registered an account with live stream or verified your account, you could only stream for up to 55 viewers. So not a lot of viewers there. I think our viewer count halved when that happened, so it went down to 750, which was pretty much our average during the event.
Well, hey, the chat room worked at that point.
That's true. So. Oh yeah, Ustream had this other weird thing where like it split chat rooms after you had 1,500 viewers.
Yeah, so we had chat 1 and chat 2.
Although that was probably more than Justin TV could handle at the time. And it's also worth noting that I cut games for time and not because runners couldn't make it. Nowadays in JDQs, even if we run late, we're still gonna have all of our runs unless a runner really can't do it.
Well, you also know approximately how long the runs will take.
Yeah,
we didn't really back then.
Setup time. What's setup time?
Yeah, exactly. So some of the games that were cut were SOS, TMNT 2, Castlevania 2, and Donkey Kong Country 3, which is much to Mike 89's relief at the time, because that was one of those games that was practiced just for the event. And we accounted for safer estimates a bit, but as they mentioned, we did not account for setup at all. In fact, cutting games for time was something I've only done once since, and it was my own run at the first AGDQ. Speaking of schedule, as the video kind of hinted, it was actually hard-coded into the website. Any change to the schedule meant that the website had to be rewritten, and each run afterward needed changing. So needless to say, we changed that after Classic Games Done Quick. And we only had one type of prize during Classic Games Done Quick, and that was drawings from the talented LLK. If you don't know who she is, she's the one who's drawing a lot of the art for the interviews on the whiteboard.
She also screamed during ActRaiser 2 for a donation.
Yeah, she was the host for ActRaiser 2 and that block. And she drew about 50 pictures based on the games we were running. And less than a week before the event was to begin.
Yeah, she confessed to me much later that she actually forgot about your event until
she told me
said we were going live like 2 days before or something, and you had mentioned it. And it's like, oh, do you have the pictures yet? And she's like, yeah, of course I do, and then started doing them right then.
Shout out Stella, okay.
I mean, her work's amazing.
Yeah.
There's a reason she's stuck around.
Yeah, there's a reason why she's still our banner artist. So, during our last run, Final Fantasy VI, the marathon had really come together, and we had kind of a tight-knit camaraderie. And Final Fantasy VI also raised around a third of our donations. We raised around 6,000 before Final Fantasy VI, and by the end, we raised over 10,000.
The last refresh, we saw that 5th digit. So.
Yeah. And donation tracking and prize drawing was a little bit more primitive back in those days. If you were a new donor, you were just entered into a spreadsheet, and the winners were drawn out literally by just pulling a random number between 1 and the present number of donors, and then reading off that person on the line of the spreadsheet.
Another unofficial sponsor.
Yep. To top it all off, Final Fantasy VI character donations were handled by the very precise method of pen and paper.
Yeah, typing in a spreadsheet was too slow at that point.
And featured last-minute snipes by the people on site, even. And
you still have that
shout-outs
frame,
to
right?
SMK's handwriting. Yes, we still have the frame. But here is a picture of it.
Good old scan.
And let's see. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jack. There we go.
So when you have that huge donation tracker we have now, and you go to donate, just remember we started with this.
Yes, this is tracker. This is the beta tracker right here. And as you can see, if you look closely, there's a couple of names that would not fly today. Hello?
Escape.
Yeah.
There we go. So
Technology is so hard
after,
today.
yeah, I know. After 50 plus hours, Classic Games Done Quick ended, and we were all completely exhausted and pretty much dying at that point. But also completely ecstatic in a way that we had made it, because we beat all the odds and made an event that pretty much looked like it was destined to fail. But we completely crushed our expectations.
Blew them out of the water.
And pretty much every way. Like, when we saw that we had, like a couple $100 in donations even before the event began, we were like, whoa! And then when we saw that there were like 300 people in the chat room, we were like, that's so crazy!
Well, for a 2010 stream, that was pretty
That was
crazy.
actually really
that
crazy.
was still one of the biggest streams.
Yeah, exactly. and excitement, and even the H word, hype.
I'm not going to say it.
Okay. You're not going to ban me? Okay, good.
I won't ban you. I'll roll my eyes a little.
It also brought the community closer in a way that we had never expected. Before Classic Games Done Quick, even with speedrunning communities like SDA, speedrunning was very much a solitary activity. And so the irony...
You did your video, you did a VCR at home.
Or a DVD recorder if you were fancy.
But a lot of people still did VCR.
Yeah.
And you would sit and you would do like a couple attempts, didn't like it, great, reset the tape, and as well as your console, just go again. And then after like several days of doing this, just in your room alone, you would send that VHS off to Nate, and he would turn it into an actual video you can watch.
Yep. And the actual process, there's no stream progress for your runs or anything like that. It's just every once in a while you hop on SDA or an IRC forum and
Splits were not a thing.
Yeah, and sharing strats was impossible.
Yep.
I mean, only the most popular games had strats shared, just because you were lucky if your game had more than one runner.
Yes. Games with 3 players were uncommon, certainly. So. And describing strats, it's just you do the thing at the thing on this one block.
Yeah, so the irony of being in my mother's basement is that it worked out better for us than the Magfest gaming room. First off, as you might have heard from that video, it was way too loud there. And it also gave the event a more intimate feeling and had the casual people playing games on a couch vibe. So the setting also helped us focus on our online audience more, because one thing that we're planning to do at Magfest, which would have been a total disaster if we tried it, is that we're planning on, interacting with the attendees and the people online, which just would have been a logistical nightmare.
Actually, an idea that got floated before we tore everything down and brought it back to your mom's place was to actually stay there, record footage, and then bring it back to your place, stream it to play it for the online audience.
I do remember that was suggested. And I was like, no.
You were the one who suggested it.
I did?
It was you. I shut that down.
Wow. I had a lot of bad.
Thank you for saving the event.
Thank you. I feel like that was something Nate would do, but whatever.
You might have suggested it, and you might have thought it was like, maybe we'll do this. It's like, no.
All right. So anyway, to be honest, if you looked at any runs from classic games done quick, they're pretty outdated in terms of strategies and execution compared to a run nowadays. A few runs have aged well. There were 2 runners who even admitted to me after the event that they didn't practice for CGDQ or classic games done quick because they thought the event would fail. And we just all go back to SDA speedrunning. And that being said, I think the Contra runners, at least up to Contra 3, hold up fairly well. And there's a nice little surprise in between Contra and Super C. Piano Toads is a great watch because of Koreshi's great piano skills, which has actually moved upstairs so that that was where the baby grand piano was. And then we had to move the setup downstairs again.
Yeah. So he was playing the Battletoads soundtrack as the runner downstairs was playing it.
Oh, no, they were both upstairs.
Oh, were they?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I thought the runner was downstairs.
And Breakdown, I think, was about 5 feet away,
Dead
maybe
asleep
less.
on the couch.
Okay.
And Link's Awakening might be a bit outdated, but the execution was amazing for its time.
That was a fantastic run.
Yeah, that was by Tigger77. And the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the redo, is a must-watch just because of what happens about halfway into the run. And as a side note, the first bonus stream actually happened the day after CGDQ. For those of you who aren't familiar with bonus stream, about 2014 and beforehand, we used to do a bonus stream afterwards that was just more casual than the mainstream.
Yeah, it's basically open mic for speedrunning.
Yeah. And so we all went to the last day of Magfest and had nothing to do afterward, except we had all the streaming equipment lying around. So we just decided to stream for fun. I remember the first thing we had on stream was Shaq Fu tournament. So one thing we all learned about having a marathon was that it's a lot harder than it looks, and we gained a newfound respect for the speed gamers, despite not being speedrunners, and for having successful charity marathons. In fact, 3 of them even came over, Phil, Baltus, and another guy whose name I unfortunately cannot remember.
I can see his face.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that Baltus was a bit sleep deprived when he told me this, so he was very emotional about it, but how sorry he was for calling themselves the speed gamers when they weren't speedrunners. And it's worth noting some people were really helpful during the marathon. There was a guy named TJP71454, and he was very helpful at CGDQ. He was a very calm presence. He was going back and forth. He was communicating with the chat, telling them what was happening at the marathon when all that chaos was going on at Magfest. He helped shuttle people back and forth. He was definitely an MVP of the event. And Nate was very helpful. He helped with all the streaming tech setup and everything, and making sure everything worked.
Never streamed before in his life.
And Arcarian was helpful for making the first GDQ website for classic games done quick. And so you might have noticed Trihex talking during the videos. He was the one recording those videos, and you might not be able to find them on his channel because they're on an alt account, which is still up. And I'm not kidding you, it's 6 lows and then 5 Z's. So it's low, 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 Z, 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 Z. That's the YouTube account. Good luck. While I was pissed at him recording everything at the time, as you'll see here. No, that's
different one.
Incorrect.
Yes, incorrect. There we go.
Members together because we have to discuss this really badly right now.
Dumb discussion. Dumb.
Ah, shut the fuck up.
As I said, the mood was not good. But
Frezio is ready to go, though. He dressed up for his run.
Exactly. I'm really thankful now that he recorded all those videos, and he was one of the few people who took pictures.
Yeah.
Because there's some of the few records of the event that exist nowadays, aside from the event itself.
Yeah, I mean, like all GDQs, you don't get the full story just from watching the stream.
Yeah. And speaking of you don't get the full story from watching the stream, we have a special guest panelist, my mother.
Yes, I've been recruited.
You have a unique perspective.
She also brought the original tracker in its framed glory.
Any of you who want to see the original tracker can come up later. It hangs in my bedroom.
You might want to say that into the microphone.
Yeah, no one on the video can hear you yet.
Okay.
All right.
So,
Well,
all right. Make sure you sit down. Get close to.
yes, sir. Yeah, this is.
Yep.
It's so noisy. All right. So Mike tells me, I mean, this is my memory of it. He says to me about a week before this event, Mom, if we pay for half of a bed and breakfast, would you go away so I can bring 20 of my best friends whom I've never met into the house? They want to stay overnight. And what I wanted to say was, dear, you don't have to pay me at all. You wouldn't catch me dead in a house with 20 video gamers, unknown to you, unknown to me. This is just, way beyond. But true to his word, he gave me some money, and I went to this beautiful bed and breakfast on the Eastern Shore. And when I got there, and I'd had a really busy Christmas season, and I was exhausted. And when I got there and kind of got up the next day a little bit like you, I thought, I wonder what all those people are doing in the house. Because you'd said something about streaming, but to me, stream is, has fish in it. I couldn't imagine. We don't even have goldfish in the house. I couldn't imagine what you were doing. But anyway, fine. And also, one of my girlfriends, at whose house I had sought refuge the night before, because you guys were all going to be setting things up. And she said, you're going to leave your house open to 20 unknown video gamers with all the stereotypes that there are. And I said, yeah, don't you think I should? Susan, what's your house going to be like when you... Never mind. I just want to go to my bed and breakfast. I'm not worrying about this at all. So I go, and after a couple days, I realized I had a laptop, and this streaming business is something you can do with a laptop. I mean, you can see something. So I opened my laptop from over somewhere near Williamsburg, and I look on AGDQ, awesome games done quick, blah, blah, blah. And the basement came up. It was amazing, and it looked so terrible. I mean, it isn't, what you saw terrible. It's like the color was it looked like salmon. Everyone had the color of salmon, and there was this really depressing picture behind you, behind the couch that everybody could see. It looked perfectly terrible. I thought, I must paint that basement when I get home. I mean, this is what I took from this event. And I watched it for a while, but of course, I have no idea what this is. I can see there's someone over there. And I think that you focus sometimes on people's thumbs. And so you could watch people's hands, and then you could watch the people. And then there were all these incomprehensible things. And it was fine. Okay, good. This is what's happening. And after a couple days, I was supposed to come back on Sunday because the event was going to be over. And I could take my bedroom back, and it was all going to be fine. And I came in on Sunday, and the house was completely open. There was I think the doors were closed, but there were no locks. And I think what my friend had been most afraid of is that these gamers were going to make off with all my property. And instead, I walk in. There is no one in the house. And
We're all at Magfest for reference.
there must have been hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of video equipment. Everybody's personal laptops and everybody's, everything was just lying around. I could have sold it all on the open market and refurbished my basement. It would have been great. But I didn't think of that in time. And eventually they came back and said, Mom, Mike said to me, Mom, we're having such a great time. We're going to all stay another day. And I thought, oh, another day. Where am I going to live for another day? So I kicked the guys out of my bedroom, and I don't know where. I think they slept under the piano. I know. I know. Rom Scout already had the couch, so they couldn't be there, or on the floor, or somewhere, and completely. And really, I have to tell you, those. I keep wanting to say guys, but it wasn't just guys because
Essentia was there.
Essentia was there with her husband,
and she was pregnant.
Yes, she was, and
like-
she was
like
doing.
7
She
or 8
did the
months.
final
Yeah.
run. She did the final run. It was, really a big deal. But all the people who were there were so lovely to me. They were so polite. They kept thanking me for being able to use the house, as though I would have ever said no. I mean, why shouldn't they use the house? I didn't really realize what a near thing it was. I'd kind of forgotten that you were supposed to be at Magfest. If you're there at the house, it was fine with me. And I just thought, oh, all these gamers, the common stereotype of video gamers is completely wrong. These are the best raised, most polite young people in existence that I have ever met. And really, I thought of asking each one of them for their mother's telephone number so that I could call these women and say, you have raised such an excellent child. They have been so lovely to me. And they cleaned up the house, as much as it was cleanable and everything. And I just had a completely new view of video gaming, for which I thank all of you who were there then. And when I walked in today and saw what it's become, I thank all of you here because it's unrecognizable but enormously moving to me because it's grown, because it's done so much good in the world, because, I don't know, because seeing it means so much to me, who saw the very first one. And I'm sure to all of you. Is that it?
That was lovely.
If you want to answer questions, though.
Oh, I'll sit here and
So I only have one last thing to say. In fact, she didn't know why everyone was so polite until I actually showed her the notes to this panel, and she was like, oh, that's why everyone was so nice to me.
I had to redo my vision. I had to redo my sense of who the gamers are and how well raised they were, because I realized they were just. But actually, that's not true, because you can have people for whom you do a lot, and they're not nearly as grateful, and they're not trying to do as many good things in the world as the people sitting right here are doing.
Thank you. And now is the time for Q&A. So if anyone wants to ask some questions, they can walk right over to the mic.
Hold on, I'm going to use my executive authority. I'm just going to go ahead and abuse my executive authority here.
Wow.
We actually tweeted about the panel happening, and we got a choice reply that I think you all would appreciate from one Jan Bresch. For those who are not aware, she used to work at the Prevent Cancer Foundation, very big part of it. And she says, in the beginning, in a basement somewhere in Arlington, Games Done Quick was born among pizza boxes and smelly socks.
Pizza boxes and Mountain Dew.
Oh, there are smelly socks too. Don't worry.
I'm sure.
Yeah, yes, there were.
Hi, so I'm actually quite curious about the couch in the basement. What was the motivation behind bringing the couch back to the subsequent GDQ events, and what does the couch hold? What meaning does the couch hold for you in terms of sentimental value?
So basically, what we want, as I mentioned in the panel, it had kind of a, gamers, kind of casual, playing on the couch vibe, not too serious, or I guess what people say nowadays, esports. But that was really just what we were trying to bring along with future events. And even though our events have become much bigger, I think the couch still helps keep a more casual-ish vibe.
Yeah, like a homey feel.
Yeah.
And just sort of like, playing games with your friends and just projecting that forward, that kind of environment. So, I'm not sure if the mic picked me up or not, but...
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything to add to that, really. It did feel... it was also really nice to sleep on that, but we stopped allowing that after the first event.
All right. Next person.
So my question is, how does it feel like, you all were 20-something and now, 30 in your 30s. Like, how does it feel like it's kind of almost a half a generation's worth of, doing something for a good cause? Like, because back, like you were younger now and like you're still doing the same thing. Like video gaming, like seen done as adults is kind of frowned upon by some people compared to when a younger age. Like,
I think it's a lot less frowned upon.
Yeah, I mean, the perception's definitely changed a lot.
So. I think the perception's changed dramatically, even within, since CGDQ, really. It's not as frowned upon anymore. I mean, there's still some of that, basement dweller stereotype.
Yeah, I've seen people make those jokes all the time, and it's like, no. Yeah. I want to put a basket over their head.
I mean, the fact is that that tons of people play video games nowadays, and I remember reading a study like 5-10 years ago that said that like 90% of males play video games, and for females it's not much lower nowadays. So I mean, it's just everyone's played at least a game or two at some point, whether it's mobile or PC or console.
Yeah, I mean, between mobile and just people who grew up with games aging, it's become mainstream, like a lot more mainstream than it was. So it's not frowned upon, and it definitely helps that there's a lot more charity events like this one popping up, and local news stations cover a lot of the ones I go to. So like it's spreading, it's getting better. And I don't know, it just does feel great to know we're a part of like the ground floor of that. It's I don't take much time to reflect on it, but whenever I do, it's like some of the best feelings I can.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, because if you told me right after CGDQ that this would become,
like an industry, basically.
Yeah, an industry, a career, a huge event, I would be like, I would have said what I said in that video that you just saw. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, none of us would have foreseen that at the time.
All right, next person.
So after like all the chaos and stress of putting on the first event, what eventually made you think, man, we got to do this again?
So here's the thing. It was such an elated and, ecstatic feeling after the event was successful. We're like, that was fun. Let's do it again.
Yeah, it was basically within hours of cutting the stream.
Yeah.
There was already talk of like the next one.
Yeah, like we're already being sad, and we're like, we should do that again. All right. Next question.
So, all of you having been there from the beginning, what has it been like personally to watch the evolution of GDQ over time? And also,
well, that's funny because you've been with that.
Yeah, I was gonna say you can also answer that question.
But I want to hear I want to hear your guys' personal experience, because I feel like it's different for everyone, and everybody brings a different perspective. And also, where do you think things are going to go, like in the next 10 years? So, two-part question.
10 years, whoa. In internet time, that's like 70 lifetimes.
Only 70? Okay, so his first question was the evolution.
Yeah, how you feel about point A to point B being now?
Yeah, so the evolution, I mean, I wouldn't imagine it would have kind of exploded like it did, but it was somewhere around 2013 that I realized that, like, it was getting big enough that it either got to the point where I'd have to hold a job and then I wouldn't have enough time to dedicate to this event, or I would have to turn it into a job somehow. And so I remember it was very strange. For about 4 or 5 months, I didn't even really play many video games at all, and I spent like, I remember reading a book about jobs and how if you're like going to try to find a job, you should spend like, you know, the amount of time that you'd spend at a job, not, you know, necessarily, you know, doing the job, but trying to find the job or create the job. And that's kind of what I did, like just doing research into how it would work and stuff. And I was really focused on doing that. And then that made me realize that, oh, this can this can evolve, this can be bigger, this can become, you know, a job even. So I think because my thinking back in like 2010 to maybe the beginning of 2013 was that, oh, you know, this is, you know, because it's nonprofit, you know, I should, you know, I shouldn't, you know, spend any money on this, and this should be a side thing. You know, it's not really a job because it's video games. You know, that's what I used to. That's kind of what I used to think back then, and I realized, well, you know, Twitch is getting bigger, streaming has become more of a thing. You know, this is becoming, you know, occupying more and more of my time. You know, we're raising more and more money, and then like what I realized that after, you know, as I did that, like now that we had actual like resources to dedicate to the events, you know, we could up the production quality, we could have, you know, more staff, we could, you know, scale up the events and do it more sustainably than when we just did it, you know, as purely volunteer. And as for the future, it'd really just be how to sustainably grow the event, because, you know, as you know, we have pretty strict caps, but like we also want to grow, and it's really always going to be a balance between growth, but not growing too fast that we lose who we are. You know, it's still a charity fundraiser. You know, we're trying to have some fun here. And while there's a lot more for attendees to do than the earlier events, because in earlier events, it used to be just like there was a practice and casual room smashed up together, basically, and you could just play games on TVs. Whereas now, you know, there's a practice room, there's a casual room, you know, there's side tournaments, there's an arcade, there's a board game room, we have panels. And so, you know, some people are like, oh, you know, GDQ got too big and, you know, it's a convention now. Well, in a sense, it always was a convention. It was just a very, very small convention.
It was like year one Magfest for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
That's about right.
Yeah. And so in terms of evolving, maybe getting to the point where we could have enough staff where we wouldn't need, you know, where we could have like a side event or something that would be a little smaller, that would maybe be more genre focused, or you know, maybe even one in Europe in the far, far future or something, maybe go international. But you know, these are kind of pipe dream plans, and right now we're just kind of working on expanding and making it sustainable and making sure we have enough staff to do so. Do you guys have anything to add?
I guess just more in terms of the perception of like how the event has come along. It's like there's definitely like a kind of like I'd say the mark is like AGDQ 14.
Yeah,
is
that's the big, when we went to a hotel.
Yeah.
Well, actually 14 is what I would call the last smaller one. Actually,
oh, okay.
There was like maybe like 400 people there. You had an honor
yeah,
to actually meet everybody at that one. Then we hit that million number, and that changed some things. So
yeah,
but yeah, it's like, you know, like
I mean, to me, it already felt like it had changed a bit, just because
it definitely changed.
Yeah, compared to 4-H.
Yeah, I definitely felt like it changed a lot for me. But then I realized, oh, I can afford this now. You know, like just a lot. You know, my mindset changed a lot too after that. So.
Well, just in terms of like attending the events, though, it's like, you know, the first one was like 20 of us. The second one was like 50 of us.
Yeah.
The third one was like
90.
Yeah.
90, 100.
Yeah, and just like, and then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, we're taking over a hotel. And okay.
That 2014 Crown Plaza in Dulles was great, but we overfilled it within that year.
Yeah. And then there was the Hilton Dulles for a home away from home the last 4 years.
Yeah.
I know that was a long answer to a question, but it was also a very open-ended question. So I hope that was a satisfactory answer to your question. And Sinister One's giving me the thumbs up. The Double Dragon 2 Knee Master gave me approval. Anyway, next question.
Hey everyone. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about the lead up to the CGDQ. So talk a bit more about how it was publicized. Like, was it I mean,
publicized?
Publicized.
It's fine.
It's fine. No. It's a good question.
No. Like, was it done purely within the SDA forums? And on top of the fact that it was in Magfest, were there other places where it was like shown, I guess?
I don't think we had too much in the way of media outlets for the first one.
Yeah, it was really mostly SDA forums, and I guess we didn't realize like how many lurkers there were in the forums and people who watched SDA back then.
Yeah.
Because we didn't really like give stats for that or anything publicly, so it was really hard to get a read on that. And then we realized that we had hundreds of people. Wow.
Yeah. Well, there was also one thing we did have was when we were going to be at Magfest, there was going to be we were going to have some like celebrity guests of sorts. Like some of the guys from Screw Attack were supposed to like come on the mic for a little while. We were supposed to have Brennel Floss on stream. We did have the Happy Video Game Nerd on stream, and I know like
we actually drove him over to the basement.
We had DuckTales 2 run. He supplied the cart. So. And I know like within like their own media circles, they probably like at least mentioned the event a little bit, so that was a little outside exposure, but that was really all we had in terms of that. So yeah, SDA front page.
Yeah, I mean that hype video,
whatever traction that video got.
Yeah,
so
that was on YouTube at the time.
It was on YouTube. Yes, it was on my personal YouTube.
So at least 3 people saw.
Yeah, exactly. And
actually, it was pushing like about 1,000.
Yeah,
it was
had
huge for my channel.
1,000. And I think we might have tried a media outlet or two that we knew the links to, but that was about it.
Yeah, no, basically, I tried for a couple of random shots at sponsorships.
I mean, even for the next couple of years after that, it was really just a lot of community word of mouth and growth.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say it was till like 2014 when we started getting picked up by news outlets, and then from 2015 on, we've made active reach to news outlets and the like.
Six
thanks
digits
to our PR.
Makes a difference.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks to our PR person.
7, sorry, yeah. Well, actually, I mean, we did get some. We hit 6 the first time too.
Yeah, a little bit, like random like stories here and there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Was hit with a very it had a very good tone to it because like it was Chrono Trigger and the $1 Million Wonder Shot. It was just like.
Yeah, so what he was saying is that there was a really good atmosphere about the $1 million because it was the first time we were going to hit it, and it was very exciting. And even by today's standards, the tracker was kind of going at breakneck speeds because it was like, I think the last 100,000 was like within 30 minutes.
Oh, yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, and then when we hit the $1 million, we're like, woohoo!
And
I
remember
the
that
wonder
was
shot with the with that Luca does that made it even more exciting. And I think that actually became an RPG Limit Break shirt one year.
Yeah, I think it did. You're right.
There was a Wonder Shot shirt.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just gonna say I do remember at the time that was because it was like at least double the size from anything we had at the 4-H Center at the time. That was the first year like people started to show concern that like we weren't the same event, that we were starting to grow too much. But once we had that moment of like hitting the $1 million mark, everyone in the event felt like family again. Even if they had doubts before that.
Yeah.
And I do remember the word sellout in esports a lot. Even back in 2013, they were like, "Oh, this is becoming too big." And so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it definitely does. Thanks.
Okay.
Hey,
hello.
Go for it.
Really an awesome story, and it's lovely that you're sharing it. So I have 2 quick questions. One is the couch still the same couch from the basement?
No, that couch was actually splitting apart a couple of years ago, and we've thrown it out.
You didn't even put it in a museum? The Smithsonian's right here, dude.
We preserved the tracker. What more do you want?
So the second question is, can you peel back the onion a little bit more? And what is it that made you think about connecting doing good with having fun?
Well, I think part of it is that even I know I said speedrun was a mostly solitary activity back then, but even then, you know, we had the forums and we talked with each other and stuff. And we did things like talk in this thing called IRC. Remember that, people? And then,
hey, Speedruns Live still has it.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And we chat in there a lot. And so, and you know, it's not really like a competitive community like, you know, expect from first-person shooters or MOBAs or, you know, esports and the like, or fighting games. And it just felt like I wanted to do something good and, like, put it towards a good cause that, you know, would make a difference in the world rather than just, you know, do it for ourselves, because it felt like it would be more of a community activity if we could, you know, somehow connect it to the greater world.
Yeah, there was never really like any point where it was even considered to not have a charity element attached to it.
And I think we should mention that we were not the first charity marathon on the internet.
Yeah, we had a model to work.
Yeah, like we were definitely inspired by both Desert Bus and the Speed Gamers. Who
as I mentioned before, and it's worth noting that like there was a day when we were like, it would be so awesome if we could beat Desert Bus. That would be so cool.
And that took like 3 years to do.
Yeah, it did.
4 years.
Yeah, exactly. And like I thought it was just a long shot dream and, you know, pie in the sky, you know. And it's like, oh, it happened.
Thanks.
All right, you're welcome. Next question.
So we've seen some of the chaotic moments and things on how you guys kind of wore many different hats or did a lot of things during the early games. In something today, so like I remember Romscout closing and saying thank you at the end of, you know, some of the streams and breakdowns, reading donations, and thank you, you are the man or the woman and stuff.
Wow, you know your history.
Yeah. So,
all right,
so how does
we
this,
have an OG here.
how does this compare to today, where you have an entire team of people just focused on keeping the AV equipment up and people, you know, doing interviews and prizes and stuff? What are your guys' roles today?
We get to sleep sometimes. It's great.
Yeah, so volunteering back in the day used to be, are you up? Good. You're going to do something.
You're going to do absolutely everything there is to do. So.
Yeah. Because, you know, back then, you know, it was so small that, like, A, we all kind of knew each other, and B, it would have been too hard to shift to people because there just weren't enough people to shift. So there are many instances of people doing, like, you know, 6+ hour or even 10+ hour.
6? You're low ball.
True.
I was up no less than 40 hours straight at AGDQ 11. But yeah, I mean, it's just something that as I've continued with my current job at Twitch, like anyone who organizes an event like this, delegate as soon as possible. You will keep your sanity for way longer. So that's a valuable lesson. But yeah, I mean, just in comparison, I mean, for me, I'd say just you have more trust in other people. Like at first, you probably didn't have any, which is why you couldn't sleep, right? Like in terms of running an event.
I don't know if it was that, but just like I didn't know who to put it to, and then like as I realized more and more, I'm like, oh, you know, like, you know, Breakdown is, and you might not know this, but he was definitely one of the best hosts we had back in the early GDQs.
Oh yeah, it's been a few years since I've been on the mic,
but and yeah, and then it just kind of slowly but gradually happened, you know, delegating things, and you know, it's easy to say, oh well, you should have done it earlier, and I remember people telling me that right, and as an event started, I'm like, this is true, but could you have told me that before the event started? But I was just shaking my head like, thank you. Yeah, it's just one of those things that kind of naturally happened, because even if I tried to back in the day, there just weren't a lot of people to delegate to. But nowadays, it's just so much bigger, and we can even find people outside of the community because we just have, you know, we have a much bigger reach than we used to. That it's easier to find people, you know, not only just staff, but just, you know, volunteers, because this event would not run without volunteers.
Absolutely not. And just lets everybody specialize more. Certainly, like take like this different like aspects when it's about
Yeah,
like 50
that's true.
different like sorts of moving parts have to come together to make one of these things.
Yeah,
run.
yeah.
And when you have people like good people heading up all those different departments, it all just comes together real nice. It takes stress off of everybody.
So a big difference would be we used to have just tech, and now it's like stream tech. You know, the person who's
tech has
working
like
the
5
streaming
different
programs,
branches
and now there's like the stage tech, the person who's actually helping set up on stage, cleaning off the headsets and wiring things up, and then there's a photographer and there's there's a separate interview crew who does their own tech and stuff like that. So that's basically a good analogy of how it's evolved.
Everything pre-2014 was like an as-needed basis.
Yeah.
Like,
Can you do it?
Remember when Cool Matty joined? Sent you the video he made for the event first, and you had never heard of him, and then he's like, "Oh, by the way, can I come to the event?" Well, we made the video, sure.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of how it happened.
Now look where he is.
Okay. I guess that's all. So thanks everyone for attending the panel, and it was a good time. So thank you.